It was the week before I graduated college. I was almost done. Maybe I had one more paper to turn in or one more final to complete. And I was so close. One of my professors, my math professors, had asked me if I'd be willing to meet with him. And so I said, well, okay, sure. And I scheduled a time with him. Just before I went to his office, I had just enough time to get all my textbooks from that term and bring them to the bookstore and get back a little bit of money for those textbooks. So I loaded up my backpack. It was heavy. Math textbooks are heavy. And I walked up the hill. Washington State University is like a hill on a campus on a hill. So everywhere you go, you're hiking up the hill. So I returned my books, got a little bit of money, and started walking to my professor's office with a wonderfully empty book bag. I walked up the stairs in the math building and knocked on the professor's door, and he welcomed me in. We said our pleasantries, and then he said, Julie, I'm really hoping that you will do a graduate degree in math. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And he was like, do you have plans for what you're planning to do after graduation? And I had to break the news to him that I was planning to do an internship for campus ministry, and I would not be pursuing a graduate degree in math. He was visibly disappointed. We chatted a little bit more, and I got up to leave, and he said, oh, wait, just a moment. I have something for you. I was thinking, what are you going to give me? And he walks over to his bookshelf, and he picks up a textbook from the math class that I had just completed with him. And I was thinking, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? And he hands it to me. And he said, I want you to have this, just as a token to remember that if you ever decide to pursue a graduate degree in math, you have my support. I very politely said, oh, well, thank you so much for this textbook. And I put it in my empty, light bag. And as I went down the stairs of the math building, I just shook my head to myself and smiled. I just couldn't believe my luck. I have really been enjoying our study of the book of Matthew. We have gone through 17 chapters so far. There's 28 total. We've gone all the way through the first 17. And one of the things I've learned from Pastor Jason is this idea that Matthew is like this I don't know how to say it, reimagining of the Old Testament. So he's taking the Old Testament and he's kind of making it Jesus-y. So he starts with the creation of Jesus' life and his genealogy. And then we have 5 narratives and 5 speeches, and then the conclusion of the send-off. And so we have made it through narrative 1, speech 1, narrative 2, speech 2, narrative 3, speech 3, and narrative 4. And here we are. We are going to be starting speech 4 today. Speech number 1 was the Sermon on the Mount. Speech number 2 was Jesus sending out the apostles, the 12 apostles, to do ministry. Speech number 3 was the parables. And now we're starting speech 4, and it is on community. These are going to be several things that Jesus has to say to us about how we interact with one another. So we're going to jump into Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a child, had him stand among them, and said, "I tell you the truth. Unless you turn around and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me. So our passage starts with a question. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, the parallel passage in Mark that kind of has a similar thing going on, it starts with the disciples fighting about who's the greatest. I just imagine them, no, I'm the greatest because I healed that leper. No, I'm the greatest because I made a really good speech yesterday. And some commentators on this passage look back a little bit and see kind of some highlighting that Peter's had lately. He's said that Jesus is the Christ, and he's also stuck his foot in his mouth, but he seems to be highlighted lately. So maybe Peter's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and the disciples are feeling insecure, and maybe Peter thinks, well, maybe I really am. Maybe I'm the greatest. I contend that there still could be an idea here that the disciples, that it could be at least somewhat a genuine question. Jesus has been talking over and over again about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven is like that. So I would have lots of questions. Okay, is the kingdom of heaven here? Is it in heaven? Is it both? How does it work? Who's the king? Who are the leaders? Am I a follower? So I think maybe there's some genuineness to this of how does it work, Jesus? How does this kingdom work? Who's in charge? Who's the greatest? Regardless of the motivation of the question, Jesus could have answered a very specific and direct question with a specific and direct answer. Jesus doesn't like doing that. I've noticed that. Have you noticed that? I would want Jesus to say, oh, it's Peter because this, or oh, it's me because this, or oh, it's my mom because this. Instead, Jesus gets a child and he brings it kind of out front and says, I tell you the truth, unless you turn around and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. I would be thinking, be like a child? You want me to become what? Small, immature, insignificant? That's what you're hoping for, Jesus? That seems like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So in what way? In what way are we supposed to become like children? So Jesus addresses this, thankfully, in verse 4. Whoever then humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So I got to thinking, what would make sense here? That you got to turn around and humble yourself and become like children. In what way are children humble like the kingdom of heaven? The first thing I thought of is that children are small and they know that they're small. If you can imagine walking around the world as a child, you're walking around and you have to do this all the time to see the people around you. You recognize that you're small. I imagine myself going into a room with a bunch of 7-foot-tall NBA players, and I too would be like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. Sometimes children's smallness actually is kind of an advantage. They can stick their arm through something that an adult can't, or fit under something that an adult can, or go down a slide that an adult cannot. Contrast this to the adult world, where we like to think of ourselves as quite big, thank you very much. We know a lot, we're pretty big. But I think that it would behoove us to embrace our smallness as children do. Astronomers keep discovering the universe is getting bigger and bigger. It was always that big, but it seems like they keep making more and more and more discoveries. And the reality is that as much as we would like to think of ourselves as big, really we are quite small. The next way that I think of children as humble is that they are learning and they know they're learning. If you tell a 3-year-old anything at all, their next question is, why? And then you proceed to explain the answer to their why, and they say why again. And this goes on in ad infinitum. And it really will never end because they want to know why. They want to know how the world works. They are eager to know. They're okay with not knowing, and they are okay asking questions. Contrast this to us, and we are a lot less excited about admitting when we don't know the answers. I know that I have definitely been in situations where someone says something, I have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. I'm following. I think we could learn a lesson from children that we could embrace, that we're learning too. Be willing to say, I don't know the answer to that. Or, I don't know the meaning of that word. Could you tell me? The third way that I think that children are humble is that they are not ashamed of insignificant acts of service. It never has ceased to amaze me how eager Rebecca has been in her past, that's my daughter, she's 8, of being willing to clean a toilet, or learn how to mop a floor, or learn how to sweep. And each time this scenario comes up, I'm like, no, these are the insignificant tasks. Like, why focus and learn on these things when you could be doing so many greater things? I imagine a world run by children. And I just imagine this huge party that they're throwing. They have the Christmas music cranked up to 11. They have glitter. They have Lego. They have cars. They have doll houses spread everywhere. It's a giant mess of fun. They are rocking out. They're having the time of their lives. And I imagine an adult coming to the door. And one of the kids comes to answer. Who are you? I'm the President of the United States. So what? I was hoping maybe I could come to your party. What do you got? I mean, I have some money that I could offer to get into the party. What else? Well, I got a cardboard box. What? You brought a cardboard box? This is incredible. Guys, look, he brought a cardboard box. This is amazing. And the kids just start shouting out ideas of what this cardboard box could be. Oh, it could be a race car. No. Let's make it a rocket ship. No. It could be a dollhouse. You see, children deal in a kind of currency that is completely different from the adult realm. I imagine the same scenario playing out with adults. and the adults are throwing the party, and someone comes and knocks at the door and offers a cardboard box, they would get the door slammed in their face. But the minute you say that you have some kind of status, some kind of money, oh, come right in, come right in. You're welcome at our party. Adults are obsessed with fame, status, recognition, money, power. They have a completely different currency of children who are okay with smallness and learning and insignificant acts of service. In this passage, Jesus is saying that we must turn. We must turn from our desire for fame and money and power and status and humble ourselves to become like children. I just finished a short story by Anthony Doerr. In it, the main character, his name is Fico, and Fico is an extremely poor man. He barely has a shelter that he calls his home, and sorry, I got distracted a little bit. So he has a shelter that he calls his home, and he has a 5-year-old son. And to make matters worse, he just realized that he lost his job. So not only is he completely destitute, but now he has no possible way of caring for his son. He has no idea how he's going to get another job. And for reasons that make sense in the story, he gets a letter in the mail one day. And in the letter is a check for $1 million. Can you imagine that? You are completely destitute. You have nothing left. You've lost your job. You have no idea how you're going to care for your son. And somehow you end up with this envelope for $1 million. What would you spend your money on first? Like, what would be the first thing that you go get with that money? In the story, the first thing that Fico decides to do is get his son, and they get on the bus. They ride the bus to the swimsuit shop, and they buy the first swimsuits that they've ever owned. And then they get back on the bus, and they go to the water park. And this 5-year-old son gets to be delighted with his very first experience at a water park. Jesus was given $1 million in spiritual currency. And he was given opportunities for fame and power. He could have taken an offering with those 5,000 plus people and those 4,000 plus people and made a little money. But every single time he had the chance for fame or power or status or success, he said no. Instead, we see Jesus touching people with leprosy. We see Jesus elevating women. We see Jesus playing with children. We see Jesus hanging out with the worst students ever. These disciples who just can't quite get it. In just our previous passages, Peter is all over the place, and Jesus is sticking it out with him. I think this dynamic is what was so confusing to the spiritual elite of the time because they were thinking that the Messiah would have to have some kind of power or success or fame, that when Jesus had the opportunity to snag a hold of those things, that he would say, yes, that's what being a Messiah is all about. And it was confusing to them that he did all these things, serving and serving and serving. Pastor Jason said last week, sometimes we don't recognize God's glory when it's humbled before us. And I think that the people around Jesus were confused because they couldn't imagine God's glory being humbled. In Philippians 2, verse 5, Paul writes this: Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Verse 8 that I just read said, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death. That word humbled is the same as in our passage. That Jesus turned from the adult currency of success, and he humbled himself in his life. You'll hear the kids coming back here in a minute. I held on to that math textbook for quite a few years. It did seem like a significant conversation that we had had. But eventually, I realized that though that textbook was significant to my professor, it was insignificant to me. In this passage, we find out that the fame and success and power and money, those are the insignificant things. And the small, learning acts of service are actually the most significant things in the kingdom of God. Verse 5, and whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me. We have these opportunities in our lives to seek after the adult version of success, or to seek after the significance of the kingdom of heaven. This morning, I was eating breakfast, and Rebecca asked me if I would play Barbie with her. Now, what I really, really wanted to do was look over my message one more time and think about it, maybe practice a little bit. But I thought, man, this is the significant thing. It would be better for me to do worse here than to play Barbies with Rebecca. And so I hope that this week, when you have the opportunity to embrace the small things and the learning things and the significant acts of service, you will do so.